Ahlia Grid, if you haven't heard me discuss it in other contexts and other vibes, the Ahlia Grid is essentially like a cosmic group project. That's one of my favorite metaphors for it. The Ahlia Grid got started elsewhere many generations ago. But the Ahlia Grid got started here on planet Earth for the most part in the last 5 or 6 generations, for the most part. And so what was basically happening is everybody who has these mechanism activations to have the ability to unlock active remembrance of incarnational experiences or wisdoms from other places in this cosmic neighborhood. Usually a particular region really stands out and feels like the anchoring point. And that anchoring point metaphor is, that language is important. But basically, I that's what I think a lot of the affinity with the starseed terminology correlates to. And so these beings are threading and weaving basically that frequency from that point that they're having an affinity to, and that frequency, like Andromeda, for example, and to Earth. So it's kind of reweaving the network so that you have that neural connectivity with that frequency again, and bringing it back to Earth. And so Earth is a very complex, and it's a whole planet. And so, it's something that takes many threads to anchor that connection. And it's specific. I think a lot of the starseed affinity regions, they tend to be core frequency holders. A lot of the reasons why they're the ones that are these base threads that will later become the Ahlia Grid is because they also, for like the more macro scale purpose at least, they serve as kind of energetic gateways in their own kind of frame of reference to other frequency regions in the anchor universe, in other quadrants, or other anchor universes. And so they're chosen because they are kind of important ripple points, that their ripples connect to other core frequencies. So they're good jumping off points, basically, that can be used to more efficiently connect all of these lost regions that we got disconnected from before Earth was a planet. And essentially, over time, all of these people that are like grid workers or light workers, or just sometimes even more unconsciously doing it, find themselves going to different places across the planet or just in their more local region, and weaving these networks and these connections. Basically, it's like leaving breadcrumbs of that frequency that you hold that energetic for, and allowing that breadcrumb to connect core points around the planet, or your local region, because it always takes large soul groups to accomplish this, to weave a very complex and nuanced and strong grid, basically. and then there's others who also do the astral component to that and weave the different we all are bringing not just that frequency but different layers of that frequency. So some of us do more tactile, physical anchorings, and some are doing it more etherically and astrally, and some are doing, a little bit of it all. And so that's been happening for generations, weaving this mass web, this massive web of different layers of these different frequencies and these different energies that have these core connections to these core places that will help bring this planet back online to the cosmic community, and to be able to allow the consciousness networks to be able to flow and connect to those places, because your consciousness energy, it has to basically have some type of energy to jump onto to kind of get to where it wants to go. I know that sounds obscure, but it's that metaphor that I've used before of like it's like someone holding a bunch of balloons, and all of a sudden the string gets cut on a bunch of the different balloons, and so that conscious reality of the balloon, and if the balloon is a bunch of different conscious reality, a bunch of different regions in our totality, they still exist. They're still fully functioning. They might even still be connected to some of the other balloons. But if your consciousness goes to follow the thread to get to that region, and it realizes the thread has been cut, then it either needs to be able to hop, skip, and jump over to another thread to hop, skip, and jump back around to that, or it just can't get to it at all. So that's kind of like a very simple example of what I'm talking about here in this kind of crash course on the Ahlia Grid and its purpose. And so the Ahlia Grid in particular is like this consciousness connectivity grid. So it would be associated with the consciousness connection hub, which I have a crash course on some of this coming. That's one of the things that I was telling you I was working on. And so part of its purpose is connecting the different regions to the consciousness hub for it to be able to process them. And so it needs that Ahlia Grid essentially to function. And Earth as a planet basically didn't have an Ahlia Grid for a very long time. It was one of many things that had gotten damaged for a variety of reasons back in the day. I talked about some of this in the Cohesion event archives and stuff, and some of it I'll talk about more. But a lot of that damage occurred, and part of that was the Ahlia Grid. And the Ahlia Grid is something that got damaged not just on Earth, but it happened for our whole cosmic quadrant, you could say, if you're looking at it from a more roughly 4D vantage point. And so Earth and this region, not just the planet, but the planet is the pinpoint root anchor for it. The 3 and 4D especially anchor for it, where the caretakership of it happens. It's the gateway point. It's the kid holding the balloons basically for the cosmic region. And so when the threads got cut, it was the access point that this entire cosmic region used to access the other balloons. And so they weren't able to access them anymore either, or it had to happen through very convoluted, weird ways. And there's a lot of other broader implications for all of this that we'll get to when I teach Primordial Reset. But essentially, what's been happening is over in these other cosmic regions, like for example Andromeda, they have been building their own version, rebuilding essentially their own versions of the Ahlia Grid. And you even see like outpostings of this. What on earth is my cat doing right now? Small child. I apologize. We must be doing some chaos transmutation through this transmission. And so you see outposts from Andromeda closer to here, where at the moment, because my train of thought got thrown off, I can't tell you what the stars are named off the top of my head, but there's the outposts more locally that were weaving this connection. Part of that, one of many, but part of that purpose was also, from an architecture standpoint, was bringing that Ahlia Grid connection closer. And so we're over on this end, we have the people, the incarnates who resonate with like starseed type concepts, and they have these mechanism activations to remember that frequency and to be able to hold that frequency, sometimes even, like I said, unconsciously. And so it's kind of building that connection again, and strengthening it. And so it's my rough understanding that part of my role as a primordial specialist, as neutrally and annoyingly frequently as it comes up, like I am the primordial macrocosmic specialist for the planet, basically, just technically. And with that, I came in and wove the what I was calling it at the beginning was the energy woven grid, and that ended up being the primordial grid. I've talked about this before, about how they tricked me into making an entire grid. By part of my training was building a grid in my local property, and then they told me to keep extending it out, and then next thing I know, it covered the entire planet astrally, and then it had covered the the cosmos. This was a multi-year project. And so I came in with a primordial grid, basically. And so there's other primordials on the planet for sure. But as far as I know, the layer that I did had to come on at a very precise time to basically begin. I have like a root coding, like the most core primordial root coding out of all the souls on earth. I know that sounds unhinged to even say out loud. I can't believe I'm even telling you this right now, but here we are. Again, there's obviously other primordials that hold other archetypal essences, but I have one of the frequencies that serves as one of like the root ones that when I did this, it acted to tie in all of the other grids that all of you other specialists, everybody else across the complexity, have been weaving to all these other regions like Arcturus and Andromeda and Lyra and all these other frequency regions. And so we needed all of these complexity regions. You needed the root tie-in to bind them all together. And there were others who had other binding frequencies that are like seed keepers and grid weavers for like, this particular anchor universe. And so I've run into one or two of those that came in and were doing their own grids for this anchor universe, but I do the one for like the totality, basically. And so that happened. That was happening mostly between 2020 and 2022 astrally for the most part. And then at that point, it began to the binding and the activation of the Ahlia Grid as a complete web, a complete grid, a completed architecture and mechanistic structure. And so that was one of many things that was being done around that time. But that was just one layer and one mechanism, but a very important one, because we need to be able to, as we all talk about, and I talk about a lot, you have to be able to have new points of view and new vantage points, new information to help you make connections, to weave new ideas and new concepts, and that you need a diversity of perspectives and insights in order to be more well-rounded. And so on Earth, we have been functioning at a very limited capacity, where we have been functioning on a very limited structure in our soul mechanism bodies. And so we haven't had that well-rounded diversity of connection that in part comes from having consciousness access to these other frequency regions. Because a part of this too is that they're not just different frequency regions. That's just an easier way to put it. But they also have different mechanism structures. And so we need to have consciousness access to these other mechanism structures, especially if our soul body has incarnated and has activations in those mechanism structures available. You need to be able to have an Ahlia Grid connection to them to be able to access them, or it feels like a phantom limb. And it feels like you get very dysregulated, and it feels like you're functioning at limited capacity, like something's missing and something's off. So especially soul bodies who have a much more like complex development of a more complex array of incarnations, then it can be extremely dysregulating here on Earth, because you feel all these phantom limbs, phantom areas that you can't make this connection to. And that Ahlia Grid is one of the very important auric field mechanism structures that supports with that process. The symposium hub too, but that's a whole other discussion, and that will come. But the Ahlia Grid, we have been having an unhinged activation of it. We've been having activations of it since, like, very significant ones since last year. Last year we saw it finally like coming online on a more physical, tangible level, and it wasn't so much just astral level activations. But during the cohesion event activations that were coming in over the winter solstice, or around like December, depending on where you are on the planet, it was coming online like to a crazy degree. Like, the cohesion event was bringing all this energy and all these activations from the macrocosm in, and part of that was weaving in more complexity and more threads and more depth of coding and more strength of more source fueling to the Ahlia Grid, and pulling it back towards the planet, back towards Earth, for us to be able to work with and for us to be able to weave and to connect. And so around that time, we had crazy upticks in UAP sightings across the planet. And some of that was definitely government shenanigans. But we were also seeing genuine sightings of more interdimensional activity around the same time. We were seeing these patches flickering on and off. And sometimes to a depth that even people who wouldn't even consider themselves spiritually evolved, but maybe were living very authentic lives for their sole purpose, were able to see through the veil to a depth and a clarity that is unprecedented. And so we've been continuing ever since the Cohesion event initial surges around mostly December happened. It's been integrating and processing kind of in stages or in ripples since then. And so that was one of the big fuelings and one of the big contributors to what's happening here with the eclipse. Particularly, I mean, obviously from my vantage point and from my specialization and from the lens that I, view energy. And so we're seeing all of this activation that has been coming through. And during the part of that process was seeing what we would do as a collective with that energy coming in, because part of that energy is like, you can kind of think about it like throwing, somebody is out on like a life raft or something, and you're throwing them a rope. Like they still have to have enough energy and to be paying attention and to be looking in the right direction to be able to grab the rope. And so there's been kind of this period over the last few months of seeing there's been a bunch of different threads now suddenly more accessible to like a more diverse degree, suddenly right in your periphery, suddenly thrown right out in the atmosphere. And again, it was a very atmospheric Auric series of integrations, and seeing what the collective was going to grab onto, which frequencies they grabbed onto, which energies they did they see them at all, like, the depth to which they did, how many they got. All of these different things factor in and ripple down into the mechanism activations. And so they contribute to, when you see me do the shifts with all the different colors and the different things that tie to different mechanisms, it's showing, okay, for example, like the Paula system, they all grabbed this many threads and applied them in X, Y, and Z way, which tipped the scale in this direction. It's not as simple as just tipping it one way or the other, but it moved it in a significantly different activating direction. And so then these things ripple back out in the broader timeline shifts. And so with everything going on, the Chaos Child has showed up to bring chaos energy to this discussion. They have a little black kitten. Hello, my child. And so what we've been seeing in the last... So that's the cohesion to rebellion stage, is that I'm talking about, that we are still technically in right now. But the eclipse is really that period of what I kind of term as a caretakership initiation trial. It's seeing what we're going to do with this energy. Like, this is energy that has been missing, and a big reason for why humans haven't been able to step up and have a more well-rounded and balanced approach to caretaking themselves, their community, and their planet. And now a lot of this potential is being put out in the energetic field to be able to wield this in a different way. And so, are we going to do it? It's also that those energies of integrity and accountability that I've been talking about for months that have been coming up really significantly, and doing things differently, X, Y, and Z, all that kind of stuff. And so with all of this, the eclipse was kind of that first marker. It was still very astral based, very atmospheric. When I was up working in the astrals with the architects and all that, a lot of what we were doing was helping to smooth the way for more, doing refinements and adjustments to make it easier for souls to be able to wield the energetic coding coming in more easily. And we were seeing a lot of success in a lot of ways. We were seeing places where there was very significant activations and developments and increases. And so throughout all of this, we had crazy Ahlia Grid activations, and we were going to have some significant ones regardless, but we had a really, the boost was significant. And so what that means is that between now and the solar eclipse especially, but even after that, but the solar eclipse is when things are going to get anchored even deeper, when the energetic momentum that is happening in the mechanism structures and the grids and all that kind of stuff, when it's going to, everything from the cohesion event is going to be fully rooted for the most part. And so it's going to be contributing to some probably wild interdimensional activity, wild activations in UAPs and our interdimensional visitation friends showing up, but it also has the capacity to lead to an uptick in conflict and tension, because those are very important catalyzing energetics for implementing new structures, for us to apply all of this new energy and this new coding. It's going to inherently require tension and friction to be able to express it and to be able to implement it and to be able to figure out how it ties in and how it can be applied in our everyday life and in our more collective experience. So that's one of the big things that's happening right now. And so with this Ahlia Grid activation that's happening macrocosmically and for our broader planet, it is bridging the gap in many ways for us to reclaim our full soul body. And so that's one of the things that I have been working on behind the scenes for a first full introduction into the foundational soul mechanisms, as you need to understand them from a human lens and from as basic as I can get it down to introduce it to you, and how that ties into the energy of breath and all that kind of stuff. But this is something that I have been preparing for years, basically, is for the collective to finally have access to full soul body potential and full soul mechanism activations. And this was the tipping point that put us there, where it's like we were seeing it happen in stages for a while, depending on people's affinities. And around the cohesion event, there was another uptick. But this is about to start hitting, the Muggle populations. We definitely do not support J.K. Rowling in this household. But Muggle is just such a good word. But yeah, it's about to start hitting the Muggle population at this point, for sure. Not just people who are more spiritually tapped in and who have been doing the work and have been weaving the connections and deepening the potentials for this. So the era of the soul body is upon us, moving from the energy body into the soul body. And so one of the key contributors for us to be able to get there was that Ahlia Grid that is coming on right now. And so what you will probably want to do is spend some time looking at the sky, because the Ahlia Grid is inherently linked to the totality. Part of what it does as a grid for its connection to the consciousness connection hub is specifically that it is a grid that connects to the totality structures, that it connects to the externalized structures and weaves your connections to them. And so it's one of those, even when working with it internally, it's one of those systems that requires engaging externally to activate it and work with it. And you already have an Ahlia Grid activation. Definitely, if you are here listening to this, you definitely have one. It's 7:07 right now. But that Ahlia Grid is this... It literally is a grid or an auric field. Some people won't see the threads. Some people will. Some people will see it more like a misty essence. Just depends on your affinities and your unique psychic perceptions. But it's literally a field, because you have billions of auric fields. Billions of different layers that have different purposes. As I introduce you to the soul mechanisms, like, these are just the foundations. Like, there's so many mechanisms. It's unhinged. But in particular, the auric field, it's what connects you to the stars. It's what connects you. That was a good yawn. That felt energetically nice for me. Is what connects you to the planet's atmospheric layers and levels. And so it's a very important grid to be working on for the caretakership season. And I am very pleased that it ties together so cleanly with that. And I'll talk about the Ahlia Grid more, but this is getting long. And I know this is a lot to sit and listen to at one time, so I'm going to wrap this up at this point. I hope that this sparked your curiosity and that you will join us over in the Macro Symposia learning track to dive deeper into this topic and to unlock the symphony of your soul.